Hi, I'm Max Rudin, President and Publisher of Library of America, and welcome to this special edition of LOA Live. Library of America is a nonprofit organization dedicated to publishing authoritative new volumes of great American writers and to keeping the many-voiced American literary tradition a vital part of our culture. We're grateful to our partners for this evening's program, the Association of Literary Scholars, Writers, and Critics, the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, Concord Theatricals, the Mississippi Humanities Council, the New York Festival of Song, and NYU's Skirball Center. A special welcome to Library of America fellows and members who support our mission. Tonight's event marks publication of this volume, Elizabeth Spencer, Novels and Stories, volume number 344 in the Library of America series, edited by Michael Gora. It is published with support from Dave Williams in honor of his wife, Reba White Williams. And Dave has also endowed it through the Guardians of American Letters Fund to keep it permanently in print. Thanks to the Williams' generosity, the edition will stand as a lasting testimony to Spencer and her achievement. The gifted Mississippi-born writer Elizabeth Spencer, who died a year and a half ago, would have turned 100 this month. Her novella, The Light in the Piazza, for which she's best known, is a deft and beautiful contribution to the literature of Americans abroad, a comedy both poignant and unsettling, glowing with the summer light of Florence, shadowed by a traumatic family secret that has shaped the lives of its three American characters. Spencer's novella inspired, in turn, a great 21st century American musical, the Tony Award-winning adaptation by playwright Craig Lucas and the acclaimed composer and lyricist Adam Guettel, who joins us tonight from the recording studio in his home in Manhattan. What is the alchemy by which one great artistic work inspires another in a different medium? What in Spencer's darkly comic masterpiece stirred Adam Guettel to reimagine it as a musical play of such ravishing beauty and intense feeling? What did that creative transformation entail? To explore these and other questions, we're incredibly fortunate to welcome Mr. Guettel himself in conversation with the brilliant Adam Gopnik. Adam Guettel is universally celebrated for his genius as a composer. His many honors include Tonys for Best Original Score and Best Orchestration for The Light in the Piazza. My friend Stephen Blyer of the New York Festival of Song calls him the most gifted songwriter in the world today. Adam Gopnik is a New Yorker staff writer and best-selling author and one of the most insightful, astute, and elegant writers we are lucky to have. In addition to acclaimed essays and books on a mind-bogglingly diverse range of subjects, he has turned his hand to his own musical, The Most Beautiful Room in New York, which opened in 2017. Library of America is honored to call him a trustee and a friend. Rounding out our cast is the wonderful Elena Shaddow, who performed the lead role of Clara in Light in the Piazza's US national tour. She is accompanied tonight by pianist and conductor Andrew Resnick. A reminder that we invite your questions and comments. The Q&A button is on your menu bar. Please let us know where you're viewing from. We now go live to Adam Guettel's studio and our distinguished guests. Over to you, Adam Gopnik.
Thank you, Max, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here in Adam Guettel's beautiful studio to analyze, annotate, celebrate, and otherwise dissect Elizabeth Spencer's remarkable novel, which I must claim, first of all, for The New Yorker, where it originally appeared on August 18th of 1960 in a wonderful edition of the magazine, wonderful issue of the magazine, just another weekly issue with a Steig cover. And that was where, if I'm right, Andrew, that's sort of where you, did I call you Andrew just now?
I was calling you Andrew all day because we have an Andrew, the wonderful Andrew
And we have an
Resnick.
abundance of Adams, an overabundance of Adams, and a paucity of Andrews. You first encountered it in The New Yorker, am I right?
No, I encountered it in the imagination or memory of my mother.
Your mother encountered, right.
Who first encountered it in New Yorker and offered it up to my grandfather and Oscar, and they seemed sort of intrigued for a minute, and then...
Just annotating that, your grandfather being Richard Rodgers, the great composer and probably the greatest of all American theater composers.
He did a lot of good things, and but he wasn't quite right for them, and I sort of understand why it wouldn't be, because it was a kind of a bear to make sense of. Not that they couldn't make sense of anything, but it just sat in Mom's sort of mental file cabinet, and then I said I was looking for a love story, but nothing tied up in a bow.
Right.
And she said
something with ragged edges and jagged parts.
Yeah, something that's sort of like on the bias a little.
Right.
And she suggested that I read The Light in the Piazza in its novella form.
Right.
I don't know that she had access to the New Yorker form, which you have told me was a little bit slightly
more
abbreviated or abridged. Yeah, and I read it once, took lots of notes from the experience of being an audience member, an audience to that story, and made a lot of notes, and then I never read it again because I wanted to always be in that sort of...
That's a fascinating detail. You mentioned that to me before, Adam, that instead of taking it apart, putting it up on 3x5 cards, figuring out the story, you read it once, took from it what you wanted, and then put it aside.
Well, you know, when you see something on stage or you read a story, there is a certain heat that is generated by certain situations and a lack thereof by other situations. Right. And those are the things that generally want to collect, the energy wants to collect together to make, to justify somebody singing.
Right.
And so I kind of do that rubbing as if you would do over a tombstone, and just sort of the things that come into relief are what end up being songs.
What you just said, Adam, I think is so significant, because it's the one thing that every virtuoso or non-virtuoso of the musical theater says is the first thing that one has to think about in adapting something. Do these people sing? Or do these people have a reason to sing? Because there are wonderful stories that are not singing stories, and other stories which can be lesser on the kind of the literary ladder, which demand singing.
Yes. I mean, sometimes I use the example of Rosemary's Baby, which would be like the worst musical ever. And somebody did ask me to consider it.
Right.
And I thought, well, first of all, it's perfect. Second of all, its greatest asset is silence. It only has that one little theme that trickles in and out, but that, you know, that just patently doesn't sing.
Right.
Whereas The Light in the Piazza did sing to me, because there are so many instances of someone wanting something so badly that it seems to justify singing, elongating the vowel.
Desire and wanting somehow seem to be the core of singing.
Or not wanting somebody else to have something, or you know, that matrix, you know, creates a kind of tectonic. You know, when these 5 people want something and these 5 people want to keep them from getting it, maybe you get a sort of tectonic rise, and that's a lot of times the songs are in
the conflict, or sometimes in the sense that, as someone, David Shire, the wonderful theater composer, once said to me, it has to be the moment of transition from speech to song is the hardest thing on stage, and it has to be at a moment of emotional ascent that demands the song from the speech.
Like a Roscoe Tanner serve, you know. He caught it on the way up. Yeah, and even within a single character, you get that that sort of topography. For instance, Margaret, in the last song she sings, called Fable, which we're going to hear a little later, she wants something, and she also doesn't want to allow herself to have it or want it. You know, those are things that extend into the vowel and into song. They're lifted
ambiguity and conflict within a character as much as between them.
And they're sort of lifted into gesture.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful expression, lifted into gesture. I should add, for anyone who doesn't know the Spencer novel, which indeed is now in beautiful form in Library of America, that it's a simple and in some ways very sad story about a mother and daughter on. It's a classic American story in the Henry James mode of Americans abroad in Italy who run into Italians who baffle and intrigue them, and then it's about how their bafflement and intrigue becomes romance and even marriage in this case.
And one of the things that's very smart about the storytelling that Elizabeth Spencer did is it's very underwritten. I guess we were using the word Mandarin before. There's something sly about the way she puts things across, which leaves a lot of room for music to explicate or get into some detail.
Well, you know, it's fascinating to say, because I was thinking about it as I was reading it, that it's a sort of model of New Yorker fiction of a particular period, which is dry in its nature or understated in its premises. And as a consequence, it's very dry, and your music is very wet. I mean, it's very...
It's sopping wet.
Is wet. It's filled with the ointments of human feeling.
Even unguents, I think.
So was that part of what you felt in seeing it, that there was room here to...
Yeah, I mean, it's the space that is there for, you know, the infinite language of music. It fills in a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be put into words, and in a way that syncs up nicely with the way she writes. She alludes to things, she intimates, she leaves out, and in the leavings out, we fill in with her in a collaborative way, and that's what it felt like me to read her thing.
And music also, I think, in your work, Adam, can make motivation where motivation is opaque or uncertain in the story itself.
It can create sort of velocity, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about all the larger kind of all the Sunday Times issues about going from page to stage and back again. But let me ask you a really specific, almost technical question to start off, because it fascinates me. I once was speaking to the ornery oracle of the American musical theater, Stephen Sondheim, and every young composer, lyricist, eventually we crawl on our knees up the steps and we demand of the oracle to tell us the secrets. And I asked him, why are musicals so hard? It's the hardest art form known to man, because if you get to, you know, the 85% mark in any other art form, you're doing fine. Anything less than 99.9 is a failure in the musical theater, and everyone says, the show doesn't work, some nice things in it, right?
Right.
There's some nice things in it.
The rejoinder.
Right. And he said, I expected him to give me a metaphysical, oracular answer, or nobody knows, or it's because so many people work on it. And he said instantly, it's the first 10 minutes. He said, in the first 10 minutes of a musical, you not only have to engage the audience, but you have to explicate to the audience the rules of engagement for the evening, and what makes people sing, when they'll sing, what the relationship of speech to song is, and all of those things.
Yeah, it's sort of the musico-narrative milieu. So, you know, in the beginning of Sound and Music, the movie, they set it up brilliantly. I mean, nothing like a helicopter shot, you know, as she crests
of an Austrian Alp. Yes, exactly.
I mean, that's, you know, if you don't sing, it's conspicuous.
Yeah, exactly. But the first 10 minutes, you're probably not even aware of this, Adam, but I was counting them out the other day, and your first 10 minutes lead exactly at the 10-minute mark to the meeting of Clara and Fabrizio. That's when she says his name is at the 10-minute mark of the score.
Funny. God, I didn't realize that.
And that's so but the first 10 minutes are fascinating to me because they're not a conventional opening in the sense it's not, oh, what a beautiful morning, or aren't we glad to be in Florence. It's a complicated duo for the mother and daughter, stories and statues.
Yeah, it's also pretty conventional musically and deliberately so. It has a sort of almost 50s the kind of music where you're pulling out on the string of an upright bass rather than down in. It has a bouncy...
A declarative
sort of,
feel.
Yeah, and they're here. So we're setting up milieu, but we're also setting up what their relationship is. And we see a little behavior from Clara that is a little bit, you know, maybe different or unexpected, impulsive, playful. And we see that Margaret has, given how old Clara needs to appear, which is mid-20s, her mother is somewhat protective over her, but the music is so sort of jaunty and 50s. So those concurrencies set up a slightly more complex palette that I hope we can deliver on later.
Right, and begin to be hinted at there too. And it occurred to me in thinking about it in those terms, what the first 10 minutes accomplishes for you. We learn it's a story about a mother and a daughter, that their energies and their interaction is going to be the thing we want to track. It's not either of their stories. It's not Clara's story and it's not Margaret's story.
Yeah.
It's the story of the two of them entangled together.
They do carry an equal amount of water in the
which is unusual for a musical. In other words, the question that everyone always asks at the beginning is, whose story is this? And it's very much both of their stories.
In a way, Clara's character carries the emotional engine. In other words, emotional ambition, romantic aspiration. The sound of her music and pretty much everything she sings is about that. Whereas Margaret carries more the narrative arc and is more the lens of the storytelling and sort of our friend up there.
Yes.
And Clara is embedded inside of the score.
And her ambiguity and Margaret's mixed emotions become our mixed emotions as the score proceeds.
And many people have felt betrayed by what happens in the story from an ethical point of view, and that's one of the ways in which it's not tied up in a bow. Yeah. It's not necessarily happily ever after, but it's somewhere underneath that and even more hopeful and more treacherous.
Yes, because I want very much to talk about that, but maybe this is exactly the moment to introduce Clara's music in a sense. We're blessed to have the spectacular Elena Shaddow and the wonderful Andrew Resnick with us. I wanted to ask you, this is the theme of the show, and I'm incapable of hearing this without weeping, so the background to all of this will be, I remember the first time I heard it at Lincoln Center, I was verklempt, and every time I've heard it since, it's such an extraordinary piece of work. I was reading through the Spencer trying to find, there's not really a moment in the Spencer when this happens, is there, where she uses this metaphor of
This is where my having only read it once, I don't.
It's implicit in the action, but you make it.
I just sort of took the title of the book and knew I had to make a song based on that and just hoped for the best.
Well, it's more than best. This is Clara singing about to her mother about her life.
That's not what I think about. That's not what I see. I know what the sunlight can be. The light in the piazza
Elena, what you
That
do.
was really beautiful. Thank you.
Elena, thank you. I still, as you can see, I find that the most moving song, and I try to figure out why it's so. Hearing Elena sing it is so moving.
Yeah.
And it's partly, if I may say, it's your brilliance, Adam, in composition, and it's also in something about the words. We know, in a way, I was thinking about this just now, it's almost like the Surrey with the fringe on top, in the sense that we know that Fabrizio is in some sense unworthy. She doesn't really know him at this point. He's an idea for her more than he is someone she actually knows. And she invests all the longing and all the desire of which she's capable in him, and that somehow is universally moving.
Well, I think that she is a universal character, and it was very important to do the best we could with that to make sure she was universal and relatable for everyone in the audience, in the sense that what has happened to her, and I'm not going to be spoiling anybody's. They probably know the story a little bit.
We can talk about, I think we can say that. I think it's
sure.
It's a classic now.
So what has happened to her? Head trauma manifests in lots of different ways, and with her, she was sort of arrested right on the brink of emotional ambition, just as we all always feel. I think until the day we die, there's always so much more to dream about. It's always so imperfect. It's so ephemeral, and she is stuck there. But in the most beautiful, she's always reaching, and that's why. And the beauty is, she talks about these pictures where these Renaissance paintings where everyone's always reaching for something. There's not a lot of grabbing.
And it's also beautiful too, Adam, for in terms of lyrics, because exactly the more is what you call 50s, the opening stories and statues, comes back at the beginning of this, right? Exactly what she isn't fully capable of engaging in.
Yes.
But the light in the Piazza, she can, and
that's her arc. She slowly enters.
And she's perched right on the edge of sexuality, kind of permanently.
Yeah. And that part of her life is completely normal, in every way. And she's ravishing, and there's a lot about her that she's incredibly bright. She's just got this thing, and that's what head trauma. That's how it can be.
Right. We had talked about this at one point before, that in a funny way, watching it now, we think of her as being. We say, oh, she's somewhere on the spectrum in a way, right? But one of the things that fascinates me in terms of storytelling is that in Elizabeth Spencer's version, right about 1,000 words in, she says, due to an accident years ago, she, Clara, had the mental age of a child of 10, right? So she's able to introduce that crucial notion right in flat, understated prose. But as a dramatist,
as a dramatist, first of all, we made her 12.
Yes.
10 felt harder.
Right. That's interesting, right? Because 10 is still a child and 12 is an adolescent.
12 is, and especially for a young girl, for a girl or a young woman at 12, 13, that is a very different state emotionally than a boy at that age, and that felt okay. 10 would have been a different challenge and a different kind of story.
But Elizabeth Spencer can share that hugely significant information with the reader flat in the 8th paragraph of the story. How do you, as a musical storyteller, how do you give that information to the audience? Because it's so crucial to the pathos of the piece.
And to disseminate it too early, or too directly, or too all in a big heap, might have been a mistake. And one of the things that we worked hardest at over the various iterations, the out-of-town productions and workshops and things, was figuring out how and when to disseminate that information. To do it right in the beginning, as Elizabeth Spencer did at 1,000 words, might have precluded my ability anyway as a songwriter to give Clara much material. I wanted to know her better, to see her behaving more, to get a lot of facets of who she is. Before that information was given to the audience in its entirety, because then I wanted them to take those new facts and cycle them around through what we've heard her do already, and essentially embroider themselves into the, oops, I did that, oh, that's okay, into the storytelling, and by identifying with all of those things that Clara sings about and the ardor with which she sings them, without relegating her to sort of an after-school special. So we couldn't do it right away.
Right.
We couldn't wait for too long to do it because that would have been coy and confusing.
It would have cheating the audience too in a way. Oh, that's her problem? That's what it is?
Right, and there is that danger. There's something a bit thudding about her having suffered a head injury from a pony.
Yes.
But these things happen. In fact, I had a friend who wrote me not too long ago, who had always scoffed at, just thought it was really corny, and I
the idea that she kicked in the head by a pony,
it's
and
just, it's rather a first world problem for
Right.
one thing, and these days, that's the last place you want to be, in the first world,
Right.
and also it just it could throw people off the scent. The scent is more, I think, more universal, and we want to find ourselves in it. Yeah.
I think it's also, perhaps it's also the case that in prose, you're speaking directly to the reader. In other words, I'm whispering to you, and it's almost as though as the narrator, as the writer, any information I want to give you, I can sort of say, hey, Adam, you know what? She has an issue. She's not all there. On stage, you're not whispering, you're declaiming, you're singing in that way too. And so how did you finally find the right way to communicate that to the audience? Where does it sit now in the show?
It is introduced in a kind of opaque way in the conversations that we see between Margaret and her husband.
Right.
We start to sense shadows and history in their relationship that seems to revolve around Clara.
Right.
When Margaret lets her husband stateside, Margaret's in Florence, and lets her husband Roy know that Clara's met a nice Italian boy, he takes on a decidedly sort of shadowy, edgy, he has an edgy point of view on it. We don't know quite why. And so we start to introduce these things that way, also through Clara's behavior.
Right.
We don't actually completely disclose what happened to her until somewhere, I think, in the second act.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But originally, we had tried it all over the place. In fact, I had whole sections that were
Working with Craig Lucas, the book writer.
Yeah,
isn't it? Right.
and and he is extremely smart and sensitive about these things, and we both were really concerned about it and to do it correctly. We don't want to drive the audience away. We don't want to relegate Clara. At the same time, we want her to remain universal. We want the fact of the romance between Fabrizio and Clara to be plausible.
Yes. Right.
So we have the language barrier to help us with that, and then we have music to help us with the language barrier.
Yes.
So that the whole thing began to fit together, but it took a while to figure out. And in fact, I wrote a whole sprechstimme thing that was sung, where she's going through almost a associative arioso around what happened, and of course that got cut. But
For Vicki Clark, you mean for
oh
Margaret?
yeah, Vicki had to learn it in one day, and of course she did.
Yes.
It was great, but what I wrote didn't work. And
But that's fascinating, because I was going to say a more conventional composer might have thought, oh, well, then we need the song, My Daughter Got Kicked in the Head, right, for her. And that never appears in the show. That isn't a musical. It isn't musicalized in that way.
the actual kicking in the head.
Or the memory, the disclosure of the trauma.
It is
actually.
It is musicalized. Yeah. So in the Beauty is Reprise, in the second act, Margaret does reflect back on it and reprises the music from the Beauty is, which is.
But it's not where the reveal. It's not where we learn. It's.
Gosh.
No.
Can you guys help me exactly where it's first? I feel like, and the pony kicked her here, and that is in the Beauty is Reprise, right? Yeah, and that's in the second act. So that's really the first time we really tell the audience exactly what happened.
Right. We know that something happened, and we know.
Before that, for instance, at the Noccarelli's house, Margaret tries to say to the Italian parents, tries to figure out how to slow down this
the freight train
romance. And she ends up just receding into a somewhat meek and vague, well, she's a special child.
Right, yes.
And of course the Italians are thrilled. Anyone marrying their son should be special.
Right. Also, if I may, Adam, there's also something very extraordinary you do with words and music. Andrew and I were talking, this will embarrass you, before you came out when we were rehearsing a bit. And Andrew pointed out to me something about just the way the harmonies in Light in the Piazza, and that exquisite song, always keep the anxiety alive and never resolve. He was saying that a more conventional composer would have come to the cadence in this way.
Oh!
And you do it this way.
Wow. Oh my God, I had no idea what a noose I slipped.
All the suspended chord, the what is it?
Thank you, Andrew.
The 13th, but that is part of the art and the magic of this. Exactly, is that the emotional content is as equally present in the
Well, I
the
think
music
some of those
words.
principles are true in music and in storytelling. You want to create compression, and in a way, narratively speaking, that's expectation, and then release needs to be something we didn't expect,
Right.
so that it really is a release,
Yeah.
instead of just a sort of fait accompli, I guess. And I think that's true in storytelling and delivering a story on stage, and also just in music proper.
Yes. No. Absolutely. You said, Adam, that you only read it through once and absorbed the emotional beats. But I was delighted to hear that you actually became a good friend of Elizabeth Spencer's over the.
Elizabeth was wonderful. And we talked a lot, and we wrote back and forth a lot, and I went down to visit her several times. And one time I went down in my spiffy new Porsche Boxster, you know, why hide my light under a bushel? So I go down there, and I pick her up for dinner. You know, I went down there to see
Down
her
there
and take
is
her out to it was either Chapel Hill or Winston-Salem.
Right.
And I think it might have been Chapel Hill. I don't know, but I
North Carolina. in any
yeah,
case, right.
and a beautiful town, and I picked her up, and she looked amazing, and you know, everything was just right. And we hop in the convertible, and I start roaring down the street, and she whacked me so hard, and I stopped, and I said, "Is everything okay?" And she said, "You close the top right now. Do you know how long I spent on my?" And she didn't let me forget it for like halfway through the meal.
Southern lady.
She was
right?
wonderful.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry, I'm messing with my mic.
No, we're fine.
Yeah, she was really sly, really funny, kind of like her writing. There was just a tilt in her mouth when she needed you to know that she knew better.
Better and was on to you.
Yeah, she did not suffer fools.
But she gave you carte blanche to do what you felt you needed to do with.
She was lovely, and so I added some stuff right away. I mean, I was working on it for a while before Craig got in, and then of course he added a lot of wonderful humor, which I had somehow forgotten was important in musicals. And but I added the whole Franca. I put a little bit more of a specificity into the Franca and Giuseppe romance, because the way I sort of experienced the story when I first read it was that there are 4 couples, and they're all on a continuum somewhere. At one side of the continuum is that first ecstatic bloom of falling in love, of actually thinking you might actually have this, you know, miracle of miracles.
Right.
And
that's
that
Clara's
feeling,
story, Clara and Fabrizio's story. Right.
And then at the other end of that continuum is the sort of abject agony and sort of anguish of either having it torn away from you or realizing at some point that you never had it really.
Margaret and Noel.
You may never have a chance to.
Exactly,
and that could be Margaret and we called him Roy. He's called Noel in the
He's
story.
called Roy on the grounds that Noel was too recherché a name or hard to.
Yes, it is recherché. That's the proper way to put it. But today it sounds Jewish, and they're not Jewish.
Right.
And I don't know if that's maybe it's only to my ear, being a Jew. I suppose there's Jewish Roys, but anyway, we went with Roy. And so everyone is on the continuum.
They're Jewish Oys, Adam, but
yes, the Oys. Got it.
Right.
So
the R's for the Gentiles.
And the bet was that everyone in the audience is on that continuum somewhere and fluctuating, and maybe that'll help them identify with the storytelling.
It adds actually a kind of a third. It's like 3-dimensional tic-tac-toe, because in the story, it's really the 2 couples. It's the parents and the young lovers, right? And Margaret's motivation for allowing her daughter unsafely and almost recklessly to enter into this love is exactly because she has a measure of the failure of her own marriage, and she's
in letting her daughter try for it. She's forgiving herself for having tried for it and not.
And failed. And yes.
You know, and feeling like at this point her marriage is truly dissolving while she's over there in this place where she spent her honeymoon with her husband when she had every hope in the world that it would be a wonderful marriage.
Right. And it's not. Another thing you did, speaking of adding the additional material in the Italian couplets, you wrote songs in Italian, actually, in the show, which breaks the old, kind of, some enchanted evening, well, that's not really in Italian, it's an Italian singing it.
Yeah.
But the convention in American musical theater was heavily accented English songs.
Right, and that was clearly not a way. What I wanted to do is try to write songs in Italian that were so clearly about what they were about, that if I chose the right vowels in the translation, which Judy Blazer, the brilliant Judy Blazer, worked on with me, those translations, and she's impeccable Italian and Florentine Italian, so luce, not luce, right? Things like that. She brought such expertise, and when we worked on the translation from this sort of unrhymed lyric that I wrote, these are the thoughts, we worked concentrically outwards from the vowel sound. Vowels themselves have meaning, and I think that's why, when Corelli opens up those pipes and he's on the right, on the right vowel, you just know what he's singing about. And we tried to work concentrically out from the right vowel for the idea. And then we made sense of it.
Trusting to the notion that the audience would, even without superscript or anything, the audience would understand the emotion simply from the quality of the music and the vowels.
Right,
and the
and
situation.
there aren't any super titles or subtitles or anything. We just
it was a ballsy, an audacious thing to do.
We hope they will feel that they are in the same position that the Americans are in, hearing Italian, sort of gleaning what it might be, hoping what it might be.
Right. Like the moment, it reminds me of the moment in The Third Man, the Carol Reed movie, right, where everything is going on in German, and we're in Joseph Cotton's place.
Yes, that's the same. Is that Orson Welles?
Yeah, he's in it. But
oh, he's not. He didn't. Okay.
Right. It's in his spirit, but it adds so much, and it put me in mind. I think it was Mike Nichols who said once that every show, every work of art we attempt, or work of entertainment for that matter, should have one thing in it where everybody says, we can't get away with that, can we?
And then it somehow works.
And it somehow works,
right.
Yeah.
Well, you find that I have found that it's important to carefully teach the audience the vocabulary, the grammar, the musical grammar, the storytelling grammar. It's like what you said in the beginning of this talk, that the first 10 minutes, you sort of need to give them a crash course in the language of the piece. What is the codex? And then they start to employ it and make sentences of their own, as they identify with the character. So that's the hope.
Yes, if it works, that you teach the rules of engagement, when people will sing, what the spirit of the song is, how it happens, what the relationship of speech to song is, and then by the end they've learned the dialect themselves and they've internalized it. Right.
Did I ever tell you the story about what happened when Steve saw the show?
Steve
Sondheim. And so I'm
the ornery oracle.
Thank God we were sold out. I'm happy to report. And I went up and watched it from the booth. And it wasn't just that we were sold out. I wanted to watch him every moment of the, I'm up in the booth and I'm watching the back of his head. And it seems like things are going really well.
Right. With those beautiful twisted face and
I only saw but even the back of his head is twisted. The guy is wonderfully so smart, like everything about him looks smart. And so I'm watching, just trying to read his head and hoping that he's liking it. And he really seemed like he was. And then the Act 2 opens with a song called Aiutami, which is also in Italian. Right. And they do lots of Sturm drawing, and it's Fabrizio having a complete crisis of confidence and anguished over Clara having been torn away from him and taken to Rome. And at a certain point, the number comes to a kind of head, and there's a silence, and then the Italian mother, who's only spoken Italian the entire time, untranslated, turns to the audience and says, I have to tell you what's going on. I don't speak English, but you've got to know. And Steve, at that point, I'll never forget, he went like this. It was way too tacky for him. Way too tacky. But you know what? We get away with it.
Yes, I like that. I think that moment is that's such a wonderful image. It's also a great title for a memoir, Reading Stephen's Head. Right?
Reading the back of his head.
Reading the back of Stephen's head, right? Yeah. For approval. But it's exactly on where it breaks through. And it's a kind of storytelling, too, because the whole piece, it seems to me, walks line, because in some ways it's if I may, it's kind of deliberately retro-romantic as an approach. But that moment makes it 21st century very much. That those can be the rules too.
Sort of breaking the fourth wall. And generally speaking, I find that to be often used as a kind of a crutch, and it's kind of weakens a piece. But sometimes you just can't think of any other way to do something, and I don't know. It was cheap. He's right.
No, it wasn't. No, it's not. He's not. He's almost always right. But we're allowed a little moment of heresy from the oracle himself. It does put me, since we're talking about Sondheim, and no conversation about musical theater goes on without mentioning him. I'm confront a confrontational thought that's been on my mind. Everybody in musical theater always talks about character and story, and rightly so. The music and the songs have to reflect character and story. And yet, in my experience as a lover of the form, the great musical theater composers write the same song often over and over again, very much to the same mood. Sondheim's written being alive again and again, the song of someone reaching for connection and never quite achieving it. Sometimes it's called Finishing the Hat, and sometimes it's called Being Alive, but that's the Sondheim aria. When I listen to your work, Adam, I always hear the music of longing in hugely movingly and directly in something like the Piazza, but again and again, that emotion of the angst of longing, of the necessity of longing, even without its fulfillment. That seems to me at the heart of the obsessive heart of what you do.
Well, there may be a certain conflict, an active conflict within me that I've noticed for most of my life, that I kind of am more productive and, generally speaking, more happy when I spend a lot of time alone. And that's how I kind of develop whatever I'm trying to really inhabit. And I'm rabidly social at the same time.
Yes. And
at times very aspirational romantically. And those things are really at odds with each other. It's the whole red shoes thing, I suppose. And that may be one of the things that sort of lays the kindling for the sound of longing. But I also have to watch myself there. It's sort of like muscle memory at the piano. Right. I mean, piano composers, Andrew Resnick among us, know that it's important not to get into those grooves too often. And so one of the reasons that I try to write different kinds of scores in very different milieu every time is it forces me not to do that too much. And within all of those different styles, it comes through anyway. It's sort of like bleeding through muslin or something.
Well, the one thing you can't suppress in any art form is the wholeness of who you are, which comes out for good or ill in everything we in every phrase or sentence we write. Let me just look, if I may, a little bit at some. I know all of our countless watchers are asking various questions, and let me look at some of them. Your granddad, I know, got this question a lot, but maybe the audience would like to hear your answer for the ultimate banal and yet fascinating question. What comes first, the words or the music?
I think he liked to say the contract, although he was producing himself, so I'm not sure how that works. But I always write the music first. Almost
always, really.
I can only think of 2 songs that I wrote the lyric first for, and they're both not great. They're boxy and foursquare, and without the infinite language of music to box myself into a corner, having created someone who I think is a detailed person through the music. And then I have to kind of write my way out of that corner as a lyricist. And that's one of the reasons my lyrics are a little frayed at the edges. They're definitely not super shined up. They can be a little too poetic or a little too soft and gauzy. I mean, I have to sort of fight my way out of those corners, but my priority is to create the detail in the language of music and try to rise to the occasion.
I won't accept that self-description, Adam, because it seems to me your lyrics are extraordinary exactly because they don't come too narrowly out of the perfect rhyme and neat strophism of most theater lyrics. I always choose to believe that when I hear often in you strong echoes of the music of pop music of our time, of Paul Simon and of
I adore him.
And really, and even of Dylan in a way, that you're prepared to search for the awkward image or the unfinished line without apology.
Well, one thing that has helped me a lot, and that tends to help me, is I always have to re-remember, I always forget, and I have to re-remember that the generative metaphor, the generative idea is you can the song can nearly write itself if you find something that is inclusive enough, but fresh enough. You know, so that there is a, you know, the light in the piazza is obviously a metaphor. It, you know, means several things. But if you take a pop song like "Unbreak My Heart," which I always love, it's been, I don't know, 25 years, but it's a very good song because the bicycle, the generative metaphor, unmeet me out on the steps of the Natural History Museum for the first time. Come in and look at the dioramas with me. Unmeet my parents. Unwatch me fall off my back.
Unkiss my lips.
Unkiss my lips.
Right.
And then unleave noiselessly and leave a note on my pillow, never to be heard from again. That generates the song, and it also gives you a way to get into a release or a B section, which would be quite
Exactly. Let me see. Let's see someone else here too. Victoria Clark, Charles Sperling from Flushing asks, and this is a good question. Victoria Clark and Kelly O'Hara seem so identified with the musical's original production. I'll broaden it out. Do you write your music with particular performers in mind?
Oh, definitely. You know, for many years, I always wrote my female roles for Terry McCarthy, who's just an absolutely wonderful performer. Once you know, and then you know, I write with Kelly in mind with a new show called The Days of Wine and Roses,
an adaptation of the Jack Lemmon movie, right?
Right, and that was really hung on, you know, like those old clothing forms that, you know,
Yes,
it was really hung on my imagining
couture,
how she might sound, you know, in those lines, and it's important to sculpt something, I think, with someone in mind, even if it doesn't end up being that person.
Right.
And certainly, Vicky was on very early on this show, and so once I had a sense of how capable she was, I kind of just went nuts, and I could do lots of things.
Right. Let me take one more here from the from people listening. I think we've answered that one. Yes, you had license to do it. And we've also found out that Elizabeth Spencer was very pleased with it. Here's an interesting question from John Sweeney, who's with us from Niagara-on-the-Lake in Ontario, not far from where my parents live.
I love it there.
So the amazing production at Lincoln Center years ago, so moving it was, also saw a much more intimate chamber production at the Shaw Festival recently and found it equally wonderful. Is it the mark of a certain type of musical that can work equally well in such a range of venues? Do you have a kind of an ideal venue, a chamber musical preferred to having a show in the Gershwin or something massive?
Well, I have to think very carefully about the required resources. You know, it's so expensive to produce now. So the Light in the Piazza started as a trio in the pit. You know,
the musicians required
piano,
right.
cello, and violin.
Right.
And then
And you play guitar as well and compose on guitar very often.
Yeah, and I wrote several songs for Light in the Piazza on the guitar. And so it started with 3 musicians, and then it went to 5. It really just went to 4 because we added a harp. Right. But then we realized we need something on the low. We need some low. We need some heft and something percussive. And so that the bass came in. And then
you're a bass player yourself.
Yeah, and so upright, of course. Right. And then we went to, I think in Chicago it might have grown to 7. Geez, I don't remember anymore. But the point I'm trying to make is you have to really think about the kind of story you want to tell, and if it can support the demand, those very big demands on resources. You know, so we sort of felt our way, and the story began to flesh out, and we thought it could well be supported by more instruments, but not until Lincoln Center did we have the resources to go to. I think it was 15 by the time.
With strings.
And with strings.
Right, and a different sound, but it sounds equally beautiful with smaller forces.
And I did a new. An adaptation. So I wrote it first for 5 players, and then we expanded to 15, and then in 2008 I smushed it back down to 5 again. Right. So I think that's the orchestration they played at the Shaw, because I went up there for that. I think I did a concert there.
Right. Wonderful. You won't believe this, Adam, but time is just racing by on us, and we have another wonderful song. But the song, I wanted to talk just a bit, because it's something you referenced earlier in our conversation, and it's very vital to the whole question of this adaptation. This song we'll hear, Fable, comes from the end of the show. And in this, the Spencer novel and in the show as well, and I've always been curious about your relationship and your intention to it. We have, I think, very mixed emotions about what's going to happen, that Clara is going to get married. And we know at one level she's not ready for marriage. She's not really ripe for marriage, for children, sexuality, and all that. At the same time, we're rooting for her. We want her to have this, and her mother, Margaret, wants her to have a shot at the happiness that she was denied. And she'd rather have her daughter risk that than continue to shelter her. So in a sense, it's Margaret's own moral elevation that she's able to do this for her daughter. But at the same time, I think we have mixed feelings about it. How did you feel about it as you were writing it?
What it did for me was, and maybe this is just, I was just justifying it. You know, I was so far into the writing I had to finish. But I think that Margaret should allow it to happen takes the ethical issue a little deeper and makes it a more the idea of forgiveness seems to that we all want what Clara wants, and that for her mother to let her daughter try for it is a way of forgiving herself from having blown it, or she may think she's blown it. And we're about to hear her take on love and the conflicting feelings she has about it. The one thing I want to just mention before we go to the song is that the music of finding that and that beautiful ecstatic first bloom and the music of having it torn away from you and losing it is the same music. Yes. It's just contextualized differently.
That's it.
And so it helps to keep the score kind of
unified in a way too. And of course it becomes overt towards the end of A Fable, the relationship of the two songs. It's beautiful and audacious, ambivalent ending to a very great musical show. Sublime Elena Shaddow, and Andrew Resnick. Fable.
Someone knows you.
Wow, thank you guys. That was gorgeous, Elena.
Gorgeous. And Elena, to be able to sing both Clara and Margaret in one sitting is astounding. And Andrew, I have to tell you, Adam, also the other thing that Andrew confided in me, which is that you and I are both in jackets, and he's not, because he said you cannot play Adam's music in a jacket. It's too expansive on the keyboard, and you'll find yourself constricted. So
sure.
It's a compliment. So no one can
What
play.
What about a Nehru jacket? Could you do that? Thank you, Andrew. You're so good. You're so perfect.
There's some composers you can play in a parka, because it doesn't take you very far. I believe it or not, our time is up. I cannot thank you enough, Adam. May I just show this beautiful portrait of Elizabeth Spencer, to whom this occasion is dedicated, that she gave to you.
Yeah, it says, to Adam with love, Elizabeth. And this is a great shot. You can see the wry, the intelligence and the wit and the I know what you're up to. She was just so
the indirection.
Wonderful.
Yes, that too. Well, it's a beautiful love if you can, not love and everything will be all right, but love if you can. And it's a wonderful fable, wonderful moral to add to a fable. Elena, Andrew, Adam Guettel, thank you
guys so
much for doing this. Our book is Elizabeth Spencer's Novels and Stories, Library of America, on her 100th birthday. Thanks so much. Max?
Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you so much to all four of our guests tonight. It was fascinating and it was gorgeous, and we're really grateful to all of you for an amazing hour. You've been listening to Adam Guettel and Adam Gopnik discuss the creative transformation of Elizabeth Spencer's The Light in the Piazza for the musical stage, and to Elena Shaddow and Andrew Resnick for performing songs from Guettel's award-winning musical with a book by Craig Lucas. Elizabeth Spencer's novels and stories have been published in a new volume in the Library of America, number 344 in the series, edited by Michael Gora. Thanks for coming tonight, and please join us for forthcoming online events from Library of America, including a staged reading of S.J. Perelman's hilarious and rarely performed play, The Beauty Part, directed by our guest tonight, Adam Gopnik, an exploration of the life and work of Stephen Crane with novelist Paul Auster, and a celebration of African-American novelist Virginia Hamilton, who transformed American children's literature in the 1960s and 70s. Details about these and upcoming LOA Live events can be found on our website, loa.org, where you'll also find information about Library of America's new Spencer volume and links to purchase that and other volumes of Great American Writing. You'll also find a recording of tonight's and of previous LOA Live events. Thanks so much again to Elena, Andrew, Adam, and have a great evening, everyone, and thank you for coming.